Hi, everybody.
Hey, man, StreamYards is really going wacky on me, everyone. Sorry about that. Every time I do any kind of stream in the daytime, that happens. Sorry. So sorry,
What happened?
everyone.
I didn't see anything happen.
On my end, I couldn't see any of the credits thing, or I had to take it for granted that it played. I couldn't see it. I don't even know if it looks like we're actually on now, live. So, friends in the chat, Wrenches, please let us know. Confirm that for us. We are, right? Okay. Excellent. Sorry about that, everyone. That's just for the rocky start, but I am made of orange rocks. And so, just the way it goes. Welcome, everyone, to Clobberin Times and more importantly, RetroBlasting's ICONICon panel. Man, I tell you what, I'm so honored to be here. I love ICONICon because I love my RetroBlasting buddies, and I hope all of you have been attending their panels. They just started today. We're going through, Michael? Sunday, right?
Yeah, it's going through Sunday. Yep.
Right, going through Sunday, and it is going to be amazing. I need to, in a second, or if any of the mods have it, if not, I will try to get it. I'll get the schedule to put that back up there so you all can see what's going on and what they've got. I mean, you would not believe all the amazing panels that we're getting ready for. This is just getting started, and I see many of my wonderful friends here, and many wonderful new people that I don't recognize. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much. What a great crowd we have there, my friends. And Michael French of RetroBlasting, sir, please introduce yourself.
I'm Michael French, and I run the RetroBlasting YouTube channel with Melinda and Tim Witten and Aaron Harper. And of course, this time for ICONICon for the 5 days, we also have Matt Swafford from Reclaimers Vintage Toys right here in the HQ doing panels and interviews as well. I'm just excited and happy to be a part of all these discussions. And I'm really excited to, as always, sit down with Clobberin Times because you and I have been doing the social media thing for 10 years now.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. And I any chance I get to rope you into doing a show with me, man, and stealing your valuable time, I'm going to do it, buddy, for now and forever, because we have just a fantastic, well, I can't speak for you. I can only speak for me, but I always have a fantastic time hanging out with you. And there's the list, the link there in the chat there, my friends, for the ICONICon schedule. That's the playlist. You can go look there, and it'll even, I think that, if I'm not mistaken, it is adjusted to what your time zone is when you see it, because that's the YouTube one, right? So,
yes, the playlist for ICONICon will adjust to your time zone automatically. So if you go to that playlist link, you will be able to see everything that's happening over the next 4 to 5 days, July 7th through the 11th, listing your time locally. So you'll know what you can hit and what you have to hit on the replay.
Fantastic, man. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And I have some great friends here, as I said. And we have a new gentleman to the channel and who is sitting on this panel with us that I am absolutely honored to have here, Mr. Alex Sanchez of the not Affinity. You may have an affinity for the channel. I hope you all do. But the Infinity Equation podcast. Alex, a pleasure to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you too, Mike. My name's Alex Sanchez. I'm one of the hosts on the Infinity Equation podcast, which airs live every Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm also a comic book veteran for the better part of the last 20 years, drawing on such recent books as G.I. Joe, Pandemica, and so on and so forth. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Excellent. Absolutely. I would, when I get a chance, I will try to get the Infinity Equation podcast. I will ask one of my wonderful mod pals if you could be so kind to get that, because I don't have the link on me, Alex, but we will get it up there, brother. And I appreciate you being here.
Sure. No problem. Thanks for having me.
Comic shops. Remember those?
Yeah, they were cool, weren't they? I mean, What happened to them? I mean,
I love them when they had them. Yeah, what happened to those? But when's the last time you've been to a comic shop, Michael French?
Well, there is a nice comic shop right near me called Dr. Knows. And it's one of the biggest comic shops I've ever seen. However, and Mike and Alex, I think you'll both understand what I mean by this, is that it doesn't really have that many back issues anymore. It carries a lot of the current stuff. It does have long boxes of back issues, but most of its floor space, most of its footprint is now trades and collected volumes and omnibuses and things like that. It's clearly a store that's been around a really long time, but they've moved over to chase the modern comic trends. And so it's not like, going into a comic shop where there was that faint attic smell from all the paper and it was all back issues with those paper or those plastic bags and just looking through them. I kind of remember there was a heavy transition from the 80s to the 90s comic shop. Like in the 90s when, post Death of Superman, post X-Men #1, post McFarlane Spider-Man, it really felt like most comic book shops after that kind of tried to get classy and level up. And they lost their flavor. I don't know if that makes sense, but
that is so spot on, buddy.
Yeah.
It does make sense. They also started selling a lot of other things around that time that have nothing to do, that aren't comics. And it's also around the time of the big market crash, when Marvel filed for bankruptcy. That's when I started noticing all these comic shops from the 80s just kind of withering and going away. So, completely different time. I was a kid. I would go to comic book stores and buy my monthly books. I would even pick them up at newsstands, and even the print world has not been the same since the late 90s, I guess, when the computer came into age, and it's been dwindling ever since, unfortunately.
Absolutely, Alex, absolutely. And again, there was, but for a time there, and like right now, what shops are left, many of them will tell you that its back issues are making a big comeback. The problem with back issues now, as I talked to a lot of my collectors friends, and we won't go into it's a rabbit hole, but key collectors are really kind of messing up back issues, the key stuff. And basically, key collecting, for those who don't know, means if there's, an example would be if there's a film coming out on a character, it's for first appearance where you may have found it in the quarter box or the dollar box a couple of months back, boom, up through the roof, and it kind of hurts the normal collectors who just like to collect the stuff and dig up treasures that they want for themselves, and eventually they usually go back down. That's why it's just a key. It's a key and not an actual really legitimately sought after comic. It's a popular thing.
Yeah.
I have found, at least this is my distinct memory, was and it was with many, because there were many comic shops in the 90s, but they were, except for legacy ones, they were all cropping up because of the comics craze, and there was money to be made in comics. But I have found that there is an inverse relationship. And I'm not even saying this with any cynicism or rose-colored glasses. I'm saying it through first-hand experience. Your comic shop, the cleaner and more pristine and more antiseptic it is, the less variety of back issues and comics you have.
Yep.
That's so true. I love me a messy old comic shop.
Yeah. Michael, a good example of that, Michael, is Forbidden Planet, which I know has some locations in the UK as well.
Yes.
The Forbidden Planet by me was that attic smelling, dingy little store when all the comic book collectors communed and talked about, the current comic, the state of current comics. And when you go to Forbidden Planet now, everything is spaced out to look like everything is in a museum case.
Yes.
There are no back issues. There are no long boxes. You get more t-shirts displayed than you do actual key comics like we were talking about. And it's just a completely different atmosphere now, unfortunately, again.
Yeah. My first...
So different.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't want to, because I've been the one continuing to talk about this in the first few minutes of this live stream. So I don't want people to think, I got on this 80s comic books panel and all Michael did was complain about 90s comic book shops. But I wanted to set the stage for that a little bit, because
sure.
The 80s comic book shops that I went to as a kid in Nashville and around the Nashville, Tennessee area, they were all independent. They were all run by, like just an independent entrepreneur. And I don't know how to describe it to people that never experienced one. So help me out. But like there was one called The Great Escape in downtown Nashville. Now, since Great Escape has kind of, in the 90s, they kind of franchised out. But from what I recall, Great Escape in Nashville had only like 2 locations, one in downtown Nashville, and then one like sort of out a ways where they could kind of spread their wings a little bit. But there were only 2 locations. And the one downtown was in this old, repurposed building that looked like it had been there since, could have been the 20s, like it could have been the 19 teens or 20s. And it had all of these hand-painted murals on the big shop windows of like Adam West, Batman, and Robin. And,
nice.
It had Superman sort of faded on the sidewall where you would park because you had to pull into sort of like the side to park because it was like downtown retail parking.
Yeah.
And you'd go in there, and it was this gutted building, like with an unfinished kind of ceiling at that point, but you still had like, some of the duct work and like big fans blowing that were mounted to not like ceiling fans, but like industrial, building fans that were just up there, just, and all that kind of stuff. And the counter was right on the right, and just everywhere you looked, it was comics in, sort of discolored, cardboard boxes. They were all organized, obviously. It wasn't like disarray. It wasn't like going into some, junk store or anything like that. But the boxes looked like they'd been there as long as the store. Like it looked like they just kept reusing the same long boxes. And then in the back was all the vinyl. Like it was comics and old collectible vinyl LPs. And, I remember looking up, and they'd have like some of the valuable issues, above the register, like they often did. And it would be things like whichever copy of Star Wars #1 had the misprinted price on it. That was like $300. And then, Silver Age stuff and things like that. A few Golden Age things. And you would go through these bags. And if you weren't collecting comics before the 90s, you might not realize that comic bags back then didn't have boards.
That's
and they
right.
didn't even have a flap.
That is correct. Oh boy, I know you will. No.
Yeah, it was just, it's a bag that fits the comic, and there's no seal on the top. It's just open, and good luck. Just go on through them.
Bags that yellowed quite a bit as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I might still have
depending
a few.
upon where you are.
Right.
I mean, you're
yeah. But there was a whole different
like
feel
that.
to it. Like they, Mike, how would you, or Alex, how would you guys describe that? In the 80s, like.
Well, it was. Well, you pretty much hit it. I mean, they were little mom and popish type places. They weren't very polished. I mean, again, I didn't go to every state because in a second I'm gonna give kind of like the origin of what my origin with comic shops, because it's very primitive. Because I'm way down, almost as south as you can get. So I can't speak to how it was like on the West Coast, for example, where they even had comic shops in the 70s, which I couldn't. I couldn't even have conceived of in the 70s, or in New York. I mean, so I don't know much about how it was. Even back then, I know it was probably rather primitive by today's standards, and probably so much better. But I can tell you that it was, just like you're saying, Michael, it was very primitive. It was very. I mean, yes, we had bags and boxes, and that was about it. They did start coming out with the bags with the flip, with the flap that you can tape down. In fact, in the shop I worked at in the early 80s, I think I keep saying boarded. You don't board them back then. I bagged and priced a collection of over about almost 200,000 comics at one point over the course of let's just say many months. It took me quite some time. Yeah. It was close to 200,000. I know exactly what the count on it was. But yes, it was the Stone Age. But it was a better age, in my opinion. Old people are always like that, and I'm old. I admit it. They're always like, "In my day, it was." But I'm sorry. In this case, I really, because I can acknowledge when that's not the case on anything. I actually can, even though I am a boomer. Yeah, no. But not in this case. These were wonderful times. I met all the greatest friends I've ever met, Michael and Alex. At geek venues, and usually almost always comic shops. A lot of what we do here on a lot of these streams. When we're just talking about geek stuff or whatever, is a lot like going in to get your comics on Wednesday. Or it used to be, actually, it was the time when it was Thursdays, and it was even the time when it was Fridays. And you hang out with your buddies, to get your new comics, and you stand there for hours, not just talking comics. You talk comics, but you talk Star Trek, and Star Wars, and Doctor Who, or whatever, and then whatever geek thing that you could talk about. Mm-hmm. So it was a gathering place, Alex.
Yeah. It was pretty much how the picture you painted, Michael. I remember the long boxes that were underneath the AC that's dripping water onto, and the stained long boxes, and just the smaller shops, which are gone now. And I'm in New York City, so I can describe to you what it was like. And it was exactly like we all, experienced. The small, dingy places were all replaced by these more modern shops. For example, we don't really have any comic shops that are that small around anymore. The only one that we have really is Midtown Comics, and they're as close to a chain for comic shops as you can get. I mean, I think even when the whole Diamond Distributors thing happened last year, Midtown ended up distributing books for DC, which creates a conflict of interest because, they're competitors with everybody else. Right. So, completely different time, but definitely the best time. Speaking as an artist, I fell in love with comics in the early mid 80s, and I fell in love with the artists that cut their teeth and got their chops in the 80s and went on to be leaders in the industry, like the Jim Lees and McFarlanes and all those other cats that went on to form Image. So a different time, but definitely the best time to be a collector, because it was almost like an age of exploration. It's like it's like superheroes started, not that they first started tackling serious issues, because you had the Green Lantern, Green Arrow books that tackled racism back in the 70s. But I mean, big seminal books like Frank Miller's Dark Knight, Watchmen, which dealt with a whole bunch of Reagan era topics and subjects. So it was a fertile ground for creative people in the industry, for sure.
We're going to be definitely talking about a lot of that, because after we get, we're going to talk shops, but we're also going to talk about what the industry was like and how great the art form was in the 80s, which I don't think it had a better era in terms of not just the big two, but all the other ones. But I would say before that, this is sort of a representation right here of what it was, how you got comics where I'm from.
Oh yeah.
You got them off the spinner.
Yep.
And it was, and that of course is someone who bought a spinner and put a bunch of old comics on there. They didn't go back in 1970 and 75 and whatever too, but still, that's basic representation. You went to the 7-Eleven, although you did have later. The K&B was my comic shop for the longest time. The K&B rack, and
it's funny, Mike, that a lot of the people my age, I guess Generation X, who collected comics like this, they have, because they're feeling nostalgic, they have spin racks in their place. Like that's how they have their comics, their key comics, I guess. Oh yeah, displayed. So
you can get a spinner now for a few $100.
Yeah,
I want one. I want to get. I had one way back long ago, of course, at the shop, but I want another spinner. But again, that was, when I first heard of Alex and Michael, when I first heard of a comic shop, I didn't really understand the words that were being heard by my ears. A shop that, wait a minute, it sells comic books. Wait, a shop for it, not a rack, not a 7-Eleven. You're saying it's a store. Mm-hmm. Let me get that right now. A store that will sell you, that is there to sell you comic books. Didn't compute at first when I was, and again, I started seeing a few things about it and reading about it here in some comic book back pages. Remember all those ads in the old 70s comics, Bronze Age comics. Mm-hmm. If you, especially like Mile High Comics, I just thought that was a place you ordered back issues from, which I did sometimes. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine, actually a cousin of mine, around in 1980, finds, you ever with these old, did you ever have those old free newspapers that would give out there were just ads for things, people selling stuff?
Yeah.
Called the Shoppers, what it was called here. And he found an ad for the phone number that said comics, and that was it. And he knew I loved comics. He told me about it, ended up calling the guy, and the guy was running a subscription service. This was long before Phil Silling was around, but I mean, there was really no Diamond. They had a lot of minor distributors, and I get the order form from him. And again, I'm used to seeing Marvel, DC, Archie, Harvey, Charlton, Warren Magazine, the main stuff. But I was not prepared for all these independent publishers that I was seeing on this order form. And then I see something called the Comics Journal.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, the comics, wait a minute, what is that? A magazine about, no, that's just not even, what are you talking about? I ordered it, and I was blown away by it, reading I did a show just a few weeks ago about all those journalism magazines about comics from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that were not exactly fanzines. Comics Journal, Amazing Heroes, Comics Interview, all the great ones until Wizard destroyed everything. And
the conventions too.
Yes, they did. And I just that's gone. It's not even around anymore. You don't have that anymore. But there was a time when there were actually magazines about comic books. I know that's just a strange concept, but they were. And so I got with this guy, and we became friends. And I was buying some comics that I couldn't believe it. I was getting older. I was in my late teens. I started discovering some of the alternative or the independent comic books that were starting to come out. And this was before there was a direct sales market. Mm-hmm. And this is what the first comic shop down in the Gulf South looked like that I helped build, put together and ran. This is pretty embarrassing, but I'm going to show it because it's the only picture I have. I ran this one. This was not the one I owned later. But it was called Southland Comics, and it is as small as it looks. You couldn't even fit a car in there. It's like a little bitty shed behind in the guy's backyard. It's a crappy picture, but
wow, that's cool. That's cool. You have that photo though.
We painted it. Totally. A friend of mine came a few years ago, found it, and then sent it to me. It's like, remember this? And oh my God, there's a picture. They didn't have cameras much back then, but I couldn't even tell you who took the picture, but and that was where we were, on a corner next to a Stop and Go, which is like a 7-Eleven, and in a residential neighborhood. Now, a few months later, we moved to a shopping center and later opened up a second store out by LSU campus. But yeah, that is that's a comic shop, folks. It was a hole in the wall. We didn't even have a rack. We had a table with little small boxes we put the new comics in.
Yeah.
And we didn't even have a lot of back issues of that. When we did, but we couldn't fit them in there. We had them in the house. And if someone wanted to look at the back, that's how primitive we were. And until we moved over to our new location, of course. So, yes, we painted that. And yes, I only painted the stripes. I could not do that logo. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's the first one, folks. Weird, I know. But that's how primitive it was here. Now, again, I can't speak to how it was in 1980 and 81 for anyone else for comic shops. This was 81, 80, going into 82. Mm-hmm. But for us, it was... But it was exciting.
Esh Singh is asking about how old, was the average person going into a comic book shop. I mean, I'll be honest. I was 9.
Yep. Same here.
9 or 10, maybe 10, going into a comic book shop, trying to get issues of G.I. Joe, because that was the other thing, my world started with a free one that was given to me by, the people, the lady that looked after me when my, mom and dad were at work or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it was a ratty old copy of G.I. Joe number 61. Mm-hmm. And that's what made me realize, the real story of G.I. Joe is in the comics, not in this cartoon. And it's so much better in the comic and all that kind of stuff. And I knew about comics, but I'd never collected any, I just I read the Sunday paper and that was about it. So I go off to the spinner rack at like Walden Books or B. Dalton or whatever it is, and I pick up the most current issue of G.I. Joe.
Yes.
Well, you start flipping through that, and Marvel, I know DC did this too, but Marvel back in the mid to late 80s, they were really good about it because, at the end of issue 61, it says, find out what happens to Outback in G.I. Joe Special Missions number 7. Mm-hmm. And it's like, so there's a whole nother book, like a whole nother title. And then I'm reading the most current issue of G.I. Joe off the spinner rack. And it says something. Snake Eyes is somebody's talking about Snake Eyes and they reference something and it asterisk. And it says, this happened way back in issue 31. And I'm like, well, how do I get issue 31? And so, I asked my mom or whatever, and I don't remember how I found out, but we found out about this store called The Great Escape downtown, and it was Nashville's preeminent comic book shop. And the first time I went in there, because my next door neighbor, he had bought stuff off the spinner rack a lot, and he had like a tatty copy of G.I. Joe Yearbook #1 and a number of G.I. Joe issues. And I went in there with a mission. My mission was, I want to walk out of there with my own copy of G.I. Joe Yearbook #1 and a copy of G.I. Joe #31 and a copy of Special Missions #7. Like, and I thought that if I did that, I would have it locked down.
Mhm.
And then, of course, those all have references in them to something else. So,
Yes, that's Marvel for you.
To answer Singh's question, I mean, I was 9. Like, I wasn't a 21-year-old college kid or a kid with a driver's license. I was 9 begging to go to the comic shop.
Mhm.
I was 17 when I started running that one, and I was. But most of my friends that I met, that I still am friends with today, almost 40 years later, most of them were a few years older than me. I was the young one of that group, in their early to mid 20s, a lot of them, and that's how I met a lot of friends that way. There were some youngsters though too. Over the course of the past 40 years, on a number of occasions I've run into some people that will say, "You sold me comics when I was a kid." And there was, and I remember them because they were kids. I went in there and you said this to me, you said that, and this has happened to me so many times. Not just in that shop there, Southland, but in later my shop that I owned that I started in 1988, Mega City Comics. It's happened to me many times. Some of these guys who I'm really good friends with today, but they were just much younger at that time. And so, but there were people in their late teens and in their early 20s coming in there. And by the way, Michael, I'm sorry to report to you that I under-ordered on G.I. Joe #1. I only ordered 15 copies probably. We didn't spec order a lot. And there was no folders back then.
Yeah.
There was you didn't have a pull list back then. We didn't.
Right.
Speaking of which, do any of you guys still have your childhood comics?
Mm-hmm. I do. I have my childhood comics.
You have everything from your childhood, Michael.
He has a smile out, childhood everything.
No.
I don't have much.
I remember
anymore.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was just gonna say I remember my first comic. It was Uncanny X-Men 207. I think I was in like 4th grade back in like 1985 or 84, and I traded one of my buddies for his stack of comics, which included X-Men for like some He-Man figures or something like that. And then I was like, what is this? And then he explained to me how it's like a continuing story, and he even told me about a few comic shops in the area. So that was my gateway into comic shops. Pretty much from the time I received that issue or that stack of comics, I knew what I was going to do because I was always an artist, but I knew I wanted to draw comics, and I knew that there were a bunch of people. When I went to that first comic store, I knew there were a bunch of people that were just like me, that were into the same thing. And immediately I sparked a friendship with everyone that would go to that comic book store, and that lasted for years. And I really missed those times. I really wish that there were stores, comic shops where, not that I don't even collect comics. I would go to a comic shop just to talk, the BS stuff about the industry or whatever, but that stuff isn't there. And it's really sad.
Absolutely, man. I tell you what, and one of the things that one of the things that's notable about the kind of reason why I wanted to talk about 80s comic shops. Like, comic shops are comic shops, right? But I mean, not just because of my own experience, running them and all that kind of stuff, because I worked in 3 different ones at 4 maybe, I think, but throughout the 80s into the 90s a little bit. But the reason why I wanted to go that is not because of shops, is also because of the industry and how extraordinary it was branching out from the big 2 that were dominating everything.
Yeah, the 80s were really the rise of, like, I guess, the modern independent part of comics.
Well, it's called direct sales. In fact, it was getting, Marvel and DC got involved in the direct sales thing as well. In other words, and what that means for anyone who doesn't know, because now who would know now? But if you were buying comics back then, that means you could only get it at a comic book shop. You couldn't get it on the rack. And I'll never forget. Early on, I was a superhero guy. Always was, always will be. Right. But the owner of the shop, ordered a bunch of these Titan albums. And what those are, for those who don't know, they're black and white reprints of 2000 AD comics, including, of course, Judge Dredd.
Great stuff.
Didn't want to touch it. I was just like,
Really?
no. I was 17 years old, 18 years old. I wanted to read, some hero comics. I didn't want to touch, but he forced me to do it. I'm like,
yeah.
All right. And I take the first one on the first Judge Caligula album. And of course, I didn't put a picture of that up here, but this is the first American color reprint of Judge Dredd.
I believe that's Brian Bolland.
It's a Bolland cover. Brian Bolland did a lot of art for 2080 for Dredd. The thing is, Bolland was slow, so we have a lot of other artists. But I fell in love with the characters with the Judge Caligula albums, and of course, collected all. Wouldn't just had to have them all. Had to have all of the other 2080 comics. But that was the first comic, I think, that made me branch out as a reader and not just stay with superheroes. I wanted to read a lot of other stuff. But at that time, there was, the direct market was so exciting. You had things, for example, like PC as in Pacific Comics were coming out with, they come out with Star Slayer #2 and by Mike Grell, whom I love. And what is in the back of that? Dave Stevens, the Rocketeer. We were, this thing is going. So you guys see these things? Man, my StreamYards are slow. So I just, my pictures take forever to look. And again, you got that. You had Frank Miller was just kind of getting done with this Daredevil run, right? And I remember when we were, it's still in that little bitty store that I showed you the picture of, where this came out and blew everybody away. Chris Claremont and Frank Miller's Wolverine miniseries. That issue #1 cover was so big we made our shop shirt of that. I wish I could find it. It's a Southland Comics, and it was just. I think back to those times, and I think of all of my friends I made. I think of the shop and all that stuff, but it's very much connected to the comics that were coming out. Obviously, that's the big thing. That's why we were there, and you had all these comics that were just starting out that people now take for granted, but you couldn't get it. You couldn't get them at the 7-Eleven. And Frank Miller was such a huge name. Remember, they had comic book superstars back then. That when he did Ronin, I over-ordered like crazy on Frank Miller's Ronin. Now, I have some critical issues with the book. Actually, I don't think I wasn't familiar with the way he changed his art style. But good Lord, were we excited about this? This was an expensive. This was the most slick printing of a comic at the time, and it was just. I see these old covers now, and even something like this, an obscure one shot when DC tried to get into it with Miss Mystic, but with that Michael Kaluta cover and Marshall Rogers inside. Look at that, a whole $1, but we thought that was expensive. And Marvel tried to compete with these companies with their first Marvel graphic novel. It aggravates me when people call trade paperback reprints graphic novels. This is a graphic novel right here. The Death of Captain Marvel. Just showing a few examples. And then, along comes, Miller was huge, but along comes a crazy Brit that I love and Swamp Thing by Alan Moore.
Yep, of course.
And changes the game. I mean, you could say Miller did change the game, but he didn't get really the shot to do it because Ronin really didn't do all that well. But Alan Moore came in and changed everything with Swamp Thing more, and it kind of allowed for, The Dark Knight Returns. Now again, I have my issues with this. I'm one of those who's a bit critical of it in some ways, but I do like it. Well, the 4th issue, this issue, I remember I was not in the business for a short time when this came out in '86. I went to a shop, and the minute it hit the stand, the one person at the shop wanted $20 for it. And I went to another shop and got it for cover price. And it led to Watchmen. More, for better or worse, Dark Knight and Watchmen changed comics. But there were a lot of other great comics. I don't know if you guys remember some of them. But I'll let you guys talk, and I'll show some pictures of some great comics that were in the 80s.
Michael?
Yeah, the the variety, seeing, guys in the chat right now are talking about the independent books and the pulpier, books that you could find at comic book shops then. And, the mid 80s was the rise of, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 84 and, the black and white ash can style independent comics.
That's it covered, Mike.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I even remember, these really silly books that would come out from independent creators. Like, I don't know why, but in the late 80s, I could be misremembering this by about a year. But I remember there was this one like independent sword and sorcery book that came out called Flaxen. And it stood out because instead of actually drawing the cover, they just got this hot blonde model to pose in like a fantasy outfit for each cover. Now, you would only find that, at a comic book shop, that you wouldn't find that on the spinner rack. It's like, what? That's where I got, the comic book store is where I started to branch out to Amazing Spider-Man. And I even read John Byrne's Sensational She-Hulk for a while because I just had that weird sense of humor.
No, so, you mean the one where she's like breaking the fourth wall all the time?
Yeah. That was
such a great series.
That was her second series.
Yeah. He wrote and he illustrated that. I mean, awesome series. I read that too. Yeah. Well, did Flaming Carrot come out in the 80s also?
Flaming Carrot by Bob Burden was,
Nexus is another one. Yeah.
Yes. The Tick was either late 80s, early 90s. Yes. By Ben Edlund. Yes. That was also one of them.
Yeah. And ElfQuest started out as an indie book and then it got picked up by Marvel.
They reprinted it for their Epic Comics line. But it was an independent. This ElfQuest, I mean, it wasn't my bag, but I had a lot of friends who loved it. This was like huge, and it was in magazine, small floppy format. And they did. Then they came out with the trades of it, and it was huge. I met Wendy and Richard Pini a few times at cons. They were nice people, but this ElfQuest was gigantic. I'm surprised someone hasn't gotten a hold of that and remade it and ruined that for all those fans. Sorry, I don't mean to jinx it for you guys. If you were fans.
They probably will. They're running out of old new ideas.
I can't believe ElfQuest is still going.
Yeah, they do. I'm surprised to see that they still make it. And this direct market that we're talking about here, of course, you had ElfQuest, you had Cerebus.
Cerebus is my favorite. Definitely one of my favorite comics of all time. But because of the, again, I'm an artist, so I think art first. Dave Sim and Gerhard, who did the backgrounds, just amazing black and white art. And the subject matter except probably for the first 20 or so issues, the subject matter is not something that you'd think you would find in a book where the lead is an aardvark. Talking about high society, religion, politics, everything.
Church and state, high society,
state, probably the pinnacle of the as far as the writing goes. Church and state's probably up there. But even till the very end, just a quality book from top to bottom.
It was popular and very controversial. I loved John Sable by Mike Grell for many years. This was a great book. This was a TV show they did for 6 episodes, not so much, but in the 80s, this was one of my favorite comics. And, Marvel and DC started seeing these books, right? They started seeing First Comics, PC Comics, Eclipse, what the Peonies were doing with ElfQuest, and they decided, well, we too can play at that game. So did DC. They started making their own straight to comic shop direct sales titles. Marvel made their Moon Knight series, for example, direct sales. Also, Khazar by Bruce Jones. And this was these were some, it was strangely enough, they even made, let's see if where is it? Oh, Micronauts even went direct after a while.
Oh, yeah.
If you'll notice. And and then DC, same deal, with Vigilante. I remember when this came out, I over-ordered on this one. It wasn't really a great comic, but we were looking forward to it anyway, And then they even took New Teen Titans to direct sales, which, and then, so it was a big deal back then. There were all these direct sales comics. They took New Teen Titans. They even eventually took my beloved Legion of Superheroes to direct sales. Comic shops only was, it happened in the 90s as well. They did it in the 90s as well, but not quite. It was a big deal. It really started in the 80s. And there was something about a series that you have to actually go to the comic book shop to get it that I think was appealing to a lot of us. We're like, wow, they can get away with more. God, Grimjack was such a great comic. This was actually DC's first, believe it or not, their first direct sales comic, but that was not because they knew what direct sales was. Alan Moore's brilliant continuation of Marvel Man, even though he had to change it to Miracle Man, unfortunately, well, for obvious reasons. Eventually finished V for Vendetta at DC, even though it started in Warrior Magazine. Anyone remember Nexus?
Of course.
Mike Barron and Badger. He's still doing these.
Yeah.
Here's an obscure one I love that no one in the universe remembers but myself and one guy.
Oh, The Shadow.
No, Wordsmith. This was a comic, but this is how different and revolutionary the 80s were. Renegade Press, which was owned by Dave Sim, did this book called Wordsmith. It was about a guy who was a pulp writer in the 30s who wanted to be a writer of more serious novels, but he kept writing pulp stuff. And that's what the comic was about. I loved it. Still have it. Just showing some pics here. And then again, once in a while, Marvel would get into the game and do something that would be straight to comic shops. It was a huge market. Comic shops only was huge, considering comic shops weren't as polished as they are now.
Yeah.
Love it.
Stan Sakai, by the way, still doing Usagi.
That's true.
Yojimbo
he
at
is.
IDW Publishing. Yep.
Here's one from Michael, even though it was not direct sales. This was a direct sales cover of it. His Dazzler there. Yeah. I'm just showing a few pictures of what it was like on the stands in the 80s. And then, of course, what it was like to have Alan Moore take DC superheroes and do brilliant things with them.
And just kind of deconstruct them in a way and build them up to. I have a lot of respect for Alan Moore. He's probably my, one of my favorite comic book scribes. And I just love how he bucks the system. He hates when they adapt his books into movies because he knows that they're going to lose some kind of quality to them. A lot of respect for Alan Moore and the stuff that he's done.
I'm probably way bigger Alan Moore fan than it is healthy to be. I just not too long ago did a whole show about his career. I have everything he did in the 80s and 90s and love his work. He's that crazy old coot is brilliant, and I love him.
Isn't he Olympian?
I think he's an Olympian god now or something, snake god or something like that.
Yeah.
I just showing again just some little memory lane there of some pics of some of the great comics of the 80s. Oh yeah. It's funny. The first day I opened my second shop, Mega City Comics, in 1988, this was on sale. Speaking of Alan Moore, controversial to say the least, but at the time we were nuts for it. I ordered the hell out of that sucker.
Yeah, and it's really the only Joker origin story that matters to me, to be honest.
I can't argue with you there, man. I thought they fumbled on the animated version, but I loved that. Yeah. I always, back around that time, I met the great Jack Kirby, King of Comics. That is my greatest geek moment ever. Even bought a piece of original art from him.
Ooh. Where's that?
The only piece I own. It is from Sandman number 5 from the 70s, not to be confused with the new.
Yeah.
And there he is, looking at, admiring my airbrush on the back. One more bit of memory from Mega City Comics. Remember 1989, Michael?
Yes, I do.
That's me. I had a contest for the Batman movie. Someone could win the Frank Miller Batman hardcover, and this young man did. And I had him. The only picture I have from the shop with my dumb, ugly ass there getting held up for the comic. A little more Alan Moore there.
That is Alan Davis, great artist who worked on Excalibur, UK artist.
Oh, I loved him.
Didn't he start out also in?
He started out with Marvel UK, but yes, what I mean, say Alan Moore, I mean these are Alan Moore characters, but yes,
You're
Alan Davis. He drew DR and Quench and Marvel Man, and even that run on Captain Britain that Moore did that was brilliant.
Yeah.
So there's the pictures, folks. Just wanted to show a few, give a kind of a visual look at what you were looking at when you went to the comic stands at comic shops in the 80s. It was terrific. I love it and I miss it. Sorry about that, Mike. I just got waxing nostalgic on that time, and I just love.
Yeah, you should really apologize for bringing great content into this discussion. What a jerk!
Well, that's true. We all know that. Oh my goodness.
Someone in the just real quickly, someone in the
Sure.
in the audience had mentioned that the worst thing about comics today is the price. When we were collecting comics, they were 65 cents, 75 cents, $1, 125. What are they now? $5?
When I started, they were 25 cents, so I'm old. But yeah, I hear you. You're right. You're right. Now they're $4.99 now, a lot of them.
It's crazy.
And they're on slick paper.
Yeah.
Which I mean,
there are not a lot of pages.
Yeah, I wish they would go back to like that newsprint kind of paper.
Me too.
It just smells.
Me too.
I wish they would make like a cologne out of it, with smell just like that old newsprint.
You know what? Kids would. I mean, I would enjoy them more. I think kids would enjoy them more, and the price would go down.
Yeah,
and you could collect more of them. And it doesn't. I hated it when they went to that, slick paper in the 90s, and they've never gotten away from it. It's like, it's a comic book. Like, and I'm not trying to belittle it, but what I'm saying is, what are you trying to prove? I have no problem with an omnibus or a collected reprint or a graphic novel having that kind of paper for an archival purpose.
Absolutely.
All of my DC Archives books, I love the fact that they're on really high grade paper and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But if I've got single issues, I want them to look like what's in here.
Yeah.
I want them to have that feel of where the pages kind of come alive, because there's not just stuff going on in the image, but there's stuff going on in the way it's colored, and even the pulp of the paper itself has life to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I
agree with you. Yeah.
No,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, along with, I agree with you. I also kind of wish they're doing amazing things now with the computer and computer coloring, but I totally miss like the old couple tone palette paper overlays at how they used to color comics back then.
Yep.
It looks a little too polished for me. If you're an artist that you do all of the above, you do the pencil, the inks, and the colors, I understand. But if you're just a penciler and inker, like I'm just for the most part, I pencil and ink myself, and I always ask when they say, "Who do you want to color your work?" I always ask for the more simplified color aesthetic for that very reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten too busy. Like, and I don't mean that like an old man, like, it's gotten too busy, I can't read it. I don't mean it like that. It's lost. It's the elegance of comics has gotten lost in the weeds of lines. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one of the things notable about the 80s too, though, because I like that. For me, like Claude there mentions the flexi-graphic format. Well, that was a bad mistake.
No.
In the 80s, in terms of the industry, I gotta say, I don't know if you guys agree with this or not, or if you've kept up with it, but Marvel really just stunk it up in the 80s for the most part. They got their asses handed to them, to be honest. Jim Shooter, look, I love what Jim Shooter did with his early Legion writing, and of course, I love what Jim Shooter did with the Valiant comics of the early 90s, which was a great run. But in the 80s, did he kill Marvel? I mean, his new universe, and I'm not even talking about that. He chased away all their prime talent to DC. He chased, for example, for early on there, you had stuff like Dark Phoenix Saga, which is wonderful. And you had great stuff. Even I like Byrne's early run on FF for the first couple of years, and I wasn't so happy with it. You had, Bob Layton's and Dave Michelinie's Iron Man run, Demon in a Bottle, stuff like that. But then he chases George Perez and Byrne and all these guys away, and DC reaps the benefit with God, I love this cover. With getting most of their prime, including Miller, Byrne, Perez, Wolfman, Ween, a lot of those people,
gone.
Leave early on in the 80s. And, I got to be honest with you, as a reader, as we talked about earlier, how I was getting into all these independent books. I still loved superheroes when done well, like, the wonderful Great Darkness saga, because I'm a big Legion of Superheroes fan. I'm a bit, the New Teen Titans for a while. It was giving X-Men a run for its money, and eventually went direct sales. but Wolfman and Perez, New Teen Titans. But man, Secret Wars. I thought it was horrible. I thought it was just a toy selling comic. And again, I'm old, and don't worry, everyone. I won't tell the story of what I did to my copies of Secret Wars here. Not today, anyway. I've already
Mike, don't apologize. I literally just said I want to go back to 19th century quality paper. Like
yes, and I just think Marvel. And they were sitting there. They had to be sitting there watching DC. Now, look, by the way, this has been on the reverse many times. It's been up. It's been up and down. Watching DC have hit after hit, not just with more Swamp Thing, and then them later, because they had a lot. Again, in the early '80s, they owned it, and then they have Dark Knight and Watchmen, and Batman Year One, and have Miller and all these guys more do all this great stuff for them, and Jim Shooter's New Universe. I mean, they did have like some of the books that you guys like when you're young, your G.I. Joe comic. People love that series, and some of those books, but they're superhero comics. I got it because it's funny, when I bumped into someone in the late '80s and early '90s, and we would have a conversation about X-Men, I'd always kind of laugh because I would think, man, I'm old, because they would start talking about something going on currently in the book, and I'd say, wow, I dropped X-Men in 1983. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what's going on there. I can't really, talk to him. Like people talk about that the Image guys who started at Marvel then went to Image. I never liked any. I never liked your McFarlanes that much, or the Rob Liefels or the Jim Lees. I never liked any of those guys. In the 90s, I was mostly sick of mainstream comics. But again, everyone remember, it's the time you were there. I was older. I was getting really tired of a lot of the stuff going on. More, and Watchmen and Dark Knight were wonderful, but they did usher in some of the darker, grimmer, the gritty stuff that really affected comics, in my opinion, in a negative way. So getting into the 90s, I was kind of, there were a few comics I loved. I read comics all throughout the 90s and even in the aughts for a while, but a lot of my favorite characters were being ruined. And by the way, I'm not lauding DC either. I hated what they did with Crisis on Infinite Earths, to be honest, and what they did to their universe as well. But that's another can of worms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's kind of funny how, like you described, they lost all their big writers to DC, and it wasn't really until they introduced a whole new crop of artists, not necessarily writers, because I couldn't tell you, who are some of the great writers from the 90s or the early 90s or mid 90s or whatever, but I can tell you who the influential artists were from the late 80s and 90s. So it's kind of strange to see that it wasn't until they started giving opportunities to some of these unknown artists that Marvel started to get a foothold on the industry and compete.
Yes, and again, it was cyclical. Like I said, it always went back and forth. There were times when DC ruled, out of the big two, times when DC ruled it and times when Marvel ruled it. Yeah. And of course, the companies are reprehensible. That's another thing. But as far as quality, just judging it on the output, it was it was very back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, it still is that way today, to this day. I mean, Marvel, DC own, what is it, like 70% of the market share, and have since, since the beginning of comics, basically. Yeah,
or at least a long time, not too long into it. Yes.
No.
And now not so much, but again, I pretty much stopped as personally, and buying new comics a couple of years back, and really the Screw 52 DC really kind of chased me away from really having a folder or anything like that. And I hear that from a lot of people now, but again, that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about the 80s comics, but I'm just saying, I'm just putting that out there because that again, you don't want to sound like the old man on the porch saying, my day was so much better, but I'm sorry, the case can easily be made that comics were just far better then. Does that mean there's nothing good coming out now, or no one with any talent now? No one's saying that ever, and I don't want that being said. Just saying, I do lean towards that older stuff.
I just have to tell you both. Oh, sorry, Mike. Go ahead,
Alex.
No, Alex. I'm sorry. Was it you talking? It's sometimes. Sorry.
No,
Alex,
it was me, but it's okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I lost my train of thought. So go ahead, Michael.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. You'll get it back.
You'll get it back, buddy.
I just wanted to tell you both that hearing an artist talking about comics, as well as hearing a lifelong comics enthusiast who also ran his own shop and has met Jack Kirby and is steeped in all this comics lore, I have to tell you, in the best way possible, I feel like I was in the chat and then I was just asked to like be in the stream. Like I'm just kind of sitting here like,
are you kidding, dude?
You guys have so much like, I mean, I was literally just that guy that was like, I read G.I. Joe and I read Spider-Man. Like, but you guys really know like how this all evolved and everything. Like it's fascinating. So I don't want you guys to think that I'm being quiet over. I am being quiet over here because I have no working knowledge, but I'm fascinated listening to the both of you talk about this stuff. I'm just,
Yeah.
So.
Well, the history of the comic book industry, I think I find it more fascinating now than the actual books because I don't even collect comics anymore since I've been in the industry. But I don't think you're out of line, Mike, when you say, we sound like old men, like get off our lawn and that kind of stuff. But the popularity of comics is reflected in the sales today. It's not selling as well as it did back in the 80s or the 90s for sure, or even the early aughts. So it's been dwindling. I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but it seems like the industry is focused more on everything else that has to do with comics except the actual publishing of the books themselves.
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that. The only thing new things that I purchased that are comic related right now. I love Tomorrow's. They put out the Jack Kirby collector. I have every issue. I still get that. I love Back Issue magazine. I get it every month. It's called Back Issue because it's about the Bronze Age. I love Roy Thomas's Alter Ego magazine. I get that a lot. And all their other history of comics. And I just always love the history of comics anyway. It's something I've always really been into, big time. And it's just right now, it's so much more interesting than anything coming out. And again, I'm not saying that as to knock anyone who does like anything you're reading. If you like it, if you're enjoying anything, God bless you. It's just that I really can't stand the new aesthetic. And that's kind of almost like with film and television as well. And in that, I am truly an old timer, and it's just the way it is. I just have to accept it. But I will still, if someone says something is a good book, I'll trust them and certainly not shy away from it. But I just love the old stuff so much, and there's still so much that I either didn't read at the time, for whatever reason, or haven't read it in so long. Go back and it feels new, especially when you have my lousy memory. But you look at Back Issue magazine. I thought I'd show this one, Michael, because tribute to the great Richard Donner, who we lost. That right there comes. I have every issue of it. It's like issue 120 or something like that, and reading about comics history for me is 10 times more interesting than anything on the stands right now. That's probably a sad commentary, to be honest.
Yeah. Lots of great documentaries too on comics, comic superheroes unmasked. I don't know if you've seen that.
A little bit,
yeah. It's like lots of Bill and Batman. I don't know if you guys ever seen
Batman
that.
And Bill. That's
Batman and
fantastic.
Bill. Yeah. I mean,
love it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those early, even pre-80s, even those creators, they died penniless and broke and living in their parents' basement, because the companies bought up, didn't reimburse them appropriately and, had to attend conventions for the rest of their life,
Absolutely. And it's a tragedy. Also, another one I would recommend to you and anyone out there, if you're, speaking of the King of Comics, Jack Kirby, there's a new one that came out about a year or so ago called Kirby at War.
Oh, really?
And it's about, and Michael, I think you'd find this one fascinating. It's not only about his wartime experiences and how it affected his art, but it's pretty much about that. And it was done by a French director, and it covers everything, all of his journeys through France during World War II and all of his exploits. And man, the stuff Jack went through, and then you see how it affected his art. I highly recommend that.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
You'd like that, Michael.
I can't wait to watch that. I'd love to hear more about Jack Kirby's war experience for sure.
It's a great one. I think it's on. I don't know if any of you have Amazon Prime. I believe that's where I saw it. So yeah, it's in Kirby at War for anyone who wants to see that. And also, if you could track down, so many things are on YouTube. The Masters of Comic Book Art with Harlan Ellison hosting. Actually, that's a good one.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. And by the way, again, magazines about comics. As I talked about, I love the Comics Journal right there. I still have almost all of my issues of that from the 80s. And I just loved it. So,
yeah.
Let's see here. Well, how are we for time, Michael?
You have officially, you have 26 minutes.
Oh, good. I was just checking. Just wanted to, didn't want to overstay our welcome here.
No. What's I was curious from both of you guys, having all this experience, knowledge, and both professional and either being an artist or an owner of a comic shop at one time. Do you guys remember, like, personally, maybe the most memorable purchase you made in the 80s from a comic book shop? The thing that you were either most excited about or that you maybe years on realize that was the most important purchase I made?
Go ahead, Mike.
That's when I'd have to. Man, there's so many, dude. But there probably is one. If you have one, Alex, you can go. And I can formulate my answer. Go ahead.
I do. And I'm not really proud to mention the comic because it was the first appearance of Cable in New Mutants. It was a Rob Liefeld, which I know how most people feel about him, book. And it was after I started collecting New Mutants a little bit later on. I collected it when it first came out through the Sienkiewicz era. And then when it got into like the 50s and around that number, I stopped collecting it, but came back when the whole Image Revolution artists came and Rob Liefeld was drawing New Mutants. And I remember I saw it hung up behind the register at my local comic book store, and it was going for like $50 at that time. Because when Cable came out, he was a big smash hit. His first appearance shot up in value. And I just remember thinking, wow, can I spend $50 on a comic book? Because I'd never spent $50 on a book. And I remember talking to the owner, and I said, listen, I got to go to my house to get some cash, and I'll be right back. But there were like two people behind me that were eyeballing it. And I was just like, please, if you can, just hold it for me until I'll be back in 5 minutes. I come back in 5 minutes, and thankfully he took the book down, put it behind the register, and I was able to buy it. Made a huge impression on me because it was, I guess, at that point, the most valuable, not so much in terms of the price, what it went for, but because everybody was talking about Cable and New Mutants in that issue. So that is the first comic book that always comes to mind when it comes to like a Shangri-La kind of moment as far as comic book purchases.
Now, are you basically looking for something like that where you're talking about just a valuable issue or just a comic that just sticks with you so much?
Yeah, it's not necessarily about value at all. It's just whatever stuck with you or whatever's your most poignant memory of, hunting that thing down or going to the comic shop to get that one thing or whatever it was.
There's so many. It's tough as far as like something I was searching for, but one that I can tell you that really just really stuck with me, as far as something I didn't expect to hit me as hard as it did, though, would probably be maybe this that I spoke of earlier, the death of Captain Marvel. This is a great. Jim Starlin, of course, had done much of the. Of course, obviously the creator of Thanos. And had a great run in Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock series and things like that. Mm-hmm. This hit me really hard because, again, superheroes die and come back all the time. And the way he was dying, without spoiling it for anyone, because you should all read it, is so different. Is so at the it's pretty out there for the death of a superhero. And when this came out, I remember this is, again, I was in that shop we showed you the picture of, and it took us it took a while to come out. This was advertised, and again, a graphic novel, what the hell? And it's the first Marvel graphic novel. And about 20,000 copies were destroyed in a fire at the printer. And so they had to go back to print, but we managed to get one. We thought we were going to get it for like 3 weeks, but we got it. And I don't know what to expect. It's just the death of him. Oh, sure, he's going to come back next one. What do you mean the death of? And you didn't know how he was going to die until you opened it up. If you did, there weren't a lot of spoilery information going on. I'm sorry to use that term, Michael, but it really affected me because I'm like, wow, a superhero can die of something like that. Mm-hmm. And I won't say what it was. I don't know if you both read that or not, mm-hmm. but it really hit me. And I think that's the one that, and then, it's a testament to it that it stays still in print, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it was the first of the graphic novel. So I don't know if that's not it, then it's probably Watchmen, because I was the ultimate Watchmen fanatic. I was probably, after 2 issues of this, the first con I got to meet Jack Kirby at, I went to Dallas Fantasy Fair, and I was maybe the first person in the history who ever cosplayed Rorschach. Yeah. So, yeah. And that was only when 2 issues were out. Yes, everyone, Watchmen is not a graphic novel. It's not even originally a trade. It was a 12-issue maxi series that took forever to come out. Not as long as Camelot 3000, though.
Yeah. What about yourself, Michael? Is there a book in particular that gives you the feels?
I was trying to think of a book, and then it struck me. Oddly enough, if we're talking 80s comic shops, and this comic shop was called Collector's World Comics, and it was nearer to our house than we realized. We were always going to Great Escape. But we didn't find out about it until right before we moved to England. So we came back that first summer, the summer of '91, and we would go to Nashville and visit family for 2 weeks or something like that. Maybe we were there a month. I can't remember. And I said, well, can we finally go to Collector's World Comics? We never got to go there when we lived nearby. And my mom said, sure, we'll go, we'll finally go see it. And it was just in a little strip mall. It was a shop that was narrow, but it was deep, it was an old, probably 1970s era strip plaza. It had a glass front, glass door, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was dimly lit on the inside. And, there was always one fluorescent bulb panel light flickering somewhere. Mm-hmm. But we went in, and it was the first time that I remember seeing in person Amazing Fantasy 15.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And Amazing Spider-Man #1. Mm-hmm. And they were all above the register, of course. Mm-hmm. But I was really stunned. I mean, these probably by a grader's standards now, because they didn't have comic grading back then, but they were probably... they'd probably get 6.0 or something. But to me, seeing them in a bag up there, wow, what? But a lot of long boxes with back issues in it and stuff. And I had collected, up until that point, I'd collected G.I. Joe #1 and other things like that, because those were kind of finally falling in value because the book was running its course and stuff. So I never suspected what was about to happen that day that would kind of become this weird part of my life. It was just a purchase. It was just a money burning hole in my pocket, and it ended up not being a comic book. It was the first time. It was the first time in a comic book shop that I was starting to see, them start to deal in vintage toys as well.
Yeah,
and it was cool because, again, this was an 80s comic book shop that was this was still pre-Death of Superman, pre-X-Men #1. This was still, it was just an 80s comic book shop that I'd never gotten around to going to. And I ended up walking out with a certain Darth Vader doll, a Kenner Darth Vader doll that, I mean, how was I supposed to know at the time, right? Yeah. And, next thing I know, 30 years later, 25 years later, I guess, that Darth Vader doll from that comic shop is in my life every day. And the comics.
Michael, was he originally broken, or did you?
No, I mean, he had his arms. He had his arms and his cape. He didn't have a saber. That was the only way. That was the only way that I was really able to afford him, because they wanted I think they wanted even then it was $30 or $50 for him or something. Kind of like your cable comic. It was $30 or $50.
Yeah.
And he's decided that he wants to get out of the lens. Go on. But he he had his arms and everything like that. And I just thought I'd never seen the dolls really, because I was born after they had already gone. I was born while they were on shelves, but I was literally a newborn infant. And by the time I was of toy age, they were gone. Right.
Yeah,
I saw them in a few toy catalogs. That was it. And the Darth Vader was the one they had. I was like, whoa, that's cool. And I had my pocket money that I'd saved, from a whole year in England or whatever. And I walked into that shop thinking I was going to buy comics. And I walked out with this Vader doll that then in the intervening years was just another collectible. It was just like, whatever. And then one day he was a broken collectible because his arms dry rotted and fell off. And now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I've got all my childhood comics. I've still got G.I. Joe issue number 31, and I've still got my G.I. Joe yearbook number 1 that I got at Great Escape. I've still got all my She-Hulk comics. I've still got all those. And yet they're all just kind of in a bin, protected, but I don't look at them every day. And there's this Vader doll that I bought from an 80s comic book shop, right, in 91. And I'm literally like, I now have this weird. It's weird. It's like there's something that's hard for people to understand about those comic book shops from back then. They really were like houses of wonder. And when I was in grad school in Athens, Georgia, I was walking everywhere. I had a car, but I would take the bus and walk everywhere just to save money on fuel and stuff. And when I would go up for classes, there's that, the Athens, Georgia town. It's a university town. So all the shops and stuff and the restaurants are right there, just one block off the quad or whatever. And I heard about this comic book shop. And I was like, what's it called? And I'm trying to remember the name of it now. The guy who ran its name was Devlin. And if you can imagine comic book guy, like he was the proto comic book guy. Like he was, and this shop had been around apparently, from what the locals told me, it had been around for like 30 years. And this was like 2003 when I started figuring this out. So I went over there, and it was like one of those where it's an old brick building, and I'm looking at the front of it. It's just like a burrito place or something, like an independent restaurant. And I said, where's the comic shop? And they're like, oh, it's up the stairs on the side of the building. You go up these stairs and you kind of go into this loft sort of converted attic thing. And I'm like, what? And so I go up there and I walked in, and it was no AC, just box fans everywhere. It was, all the comics just kind of sitting in little rooms and stuff and and I was like, holy crap, I'm back. I have time traveled back to 1986, and I'm standing in the Great Escape.
I love it.
What? And I was buying a lot of Superman at the time, trying to fill my back issues. I was trying to get everything from the Man of Steel relaunch all the way through present. And I was also trying to get anything pre-burn relaunch that I could get, for a good price. And so I was buying all kinds of stuff from there all the way through grad school. I was spending paychecks, like water, just trying to get stuff there. But he had some good stuff. But it was like he was the comic book guy. He had the beard and the glasses and the long hair on the sides, but no hair on top.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked it looked like Matt Groening must have come in there one day and went, "You're going to be a character in a show." Like, kind of like
called a skullet, right?
Yeah, it's a skullet. Yeah,
Okay.
but the beard camouflaged the skullet. Like you didn't quite see how intense it was.
Yeah.
And he was like this kind of nice enough guy. Like he wasn't rude or anything, but he kind of kept to himself and read his comics. And when you'd ask him something about a particular comic, he'd always have an opinion. Never condescending though. He wasn't like the Simpsons comic book guy in that respect. Just visually, he was. But it was the coolest shop, and it really took me back. And you were buying real comics there at reasonable prices. Like it wasn't, it wasn't everything was pristine and in glass, and they were charging diamond price guide prices for it or anything.
Before collectors got super fickle about their comics.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
A question for you guys, real quick. Well, Luis Saavedra had asked, what newspaper comic strips do you guys enjoy the most? I love Dick Tracy. So that is for me. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys is, do you think, especially you, Mike, being involved running a comic shop and owning one, do you think that comic book store owners intentionally made their stores a little uninviting to keep out the I don't know, the market watchers or people that didn't have an emotional investment into comics, didn't read them monthly? Do you think that they made their stores unattractive to keep those other kinds of people away?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, intentionally, I don't know if that was ever. I mean, again, the thought process. I don't know. It could have been. It would never have occurred to me to do that. I mean, I used to limit quantities and not let people buy too much of something I knew that was hot that they were just going to try to turn around. So we were definitely wary of people that were just doing that weren't really, because I've always look. This is an art form. These comics. These things are being read and enjoyed. That's what they're for. And I have many dear friends who are collectors. I mean, I respect the collector's market, but these things are created for entertainment and to be art. The fact that they become, expensive and become collector's items is because of their age and diminishing availability. And it should be that, not artificially produced. So while I don't like those things, I don't know if anyone actually sets up their shop to be repellent to people doing that, because I don't think it would stop them anyway. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I spoke to a comic book store owner, I mean, decades ago by this point, who reiterated that to me, and I just found that kind of strange. It
is weird. It could be though.
Like, don't you want as many customers as or at least the possibility of them, a customer walking in? But no, I mean,
I've never, again, it could be like, well, since you've talked to that guy, well, there you go. It could be there are people that have done it. I've never really run into anybody.
Yeah, I feel like it was more like just, this is a space that we just happen to have, and we're going to try to cram as much stuff as we can into it that'll interest folks.
Yeah. Well,
and it just happens to look kind of crappy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I loved it that way. I mean, it's nothing I like better than if I'm out of town somewhere traveling, hitting the whatever was left of the local comic shops or now, but every time I would go out of town anywhere, I had to find the comic shop. That's what I wanted to find first.
Yeah.
And of course, that's also the same with like flea markets and other types of places where you just find cheap stuff. Some cons, when they have the cheap boxes and stuff. We had actually had a con this 2 weeks ago, and we had our first return of the cons here.
Yeah,
Michael Golden was a guest there actually.
Oh yeah,
he's actually Michael Golden.
He's actually doing a variant cover for my indie book that I did on the
really
site. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, that's great. And but yeah, I like I love going around getting the cheap, going to the cheap bins, and I love finding the cheap trade paperbacks and things like that. But my collector friends, love them, and I love the ones who are sincere about it. The ones who just try to, buy up all. I used to have to limit quantities. I can tell you that. Batman: The Killing Joke. In fact, that everybody was coming around trying to grab multiples of that one, and my customers were first. Not, and I had to limit quantities quite often.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to ask you, which escapes me now, so maybe
sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to make you forget one there.
No.
Comic strips, though, it's Dick Tracy. Obviously, I know Michael's a big Dick Tracy fan as well. I love Prince Valiant, and I love Bert Hogarth's Tarzan strip. In fact, I love a lot of the pulp strips. Of course, Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon is to me probably the greatest comic strip ever. If I had to pick, but my bias is towards that. But many different strip artists on Tarzan, including Hogarth and even Hal Foster and the others. So the Tarzan strips, Terry and the Pirates by Milcaniff, of course.
Oh yeah. Actually, Terry and the Pirates, owned by Tribune Media, who also owns Dick Tracy, I believe. I actually did some when Tribune was doing the it was like a play, Broadway musical adaptation of Annie. The last time they came around, I actually ended up doing some stuff for Terry and the Pirates. They were going to relaunch it into a comic book series, did a whole bunch of designs, and it just kind of fell through, unfortunately.
Oh, wow. Dang.
But I do remember what I was going to ask you guys. In your comic book stores, did you guys have like incentives to buy there? Like, for example, one of the stores that I would frequent, they would give you a card. It's like a club card, and it had a whole bunch of boxes that every time you spent like $20 or more, they would, punch one of the boxes. And when you made your way all around the card, you would have yourself $50 or so of like back issues that you could spend it on. Did you guys have anything like that?
I didn't know. I never had anything like that. You must have gotten real lucky with your shop.
Yeah, that's a pretty good.
All the stores in here that I went to had some kind of thing where, like, if you spend a certain amount every month, you can get like a free whatever,
I ran a few specials and things like that. I don't know if I did anything like that so much, but I did definitely give discounts on new comics, even before I started a folder system, I gave a certain discounts to customers and stuff like that on the new comics. You have to give them a certain percentage off or something like that, because you had to be competitive, of course. And not only that, I mean, just an old softy. They were friends, and I wanted them to think they were getting,
Yeah.
they were friends because they weren't just customers to me. They were friends, and I had so much fun with them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is probably why I'm not in business anymore.
For everybody, I just saw a comment that said Michael is bored, and I'm like, no. As a matter of fact, what I'm doing is I'm just quickly making sure that links get populated for the next ICONICON video coming up. So I'm not bored. I was actually doing my convention organizing job. I have responsibilities, okay?
I didn't know how you guys. I was on the earlier panel that I did with Melinda. I gave you guys props and just like how you guys have done such a great job organizing and mediating and coordinating, and so great job, guys.
Well, I didn't mean to derail the conversation.
You did not at all,
guys saying Michael's bored, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I want this done as soon as possible, and I'm back to the conversation. So
Melinda has her back in the chat.
Everybody picks on Michael, except for me. I'm the only one that doesn't pick on him. Michael, if everyone didn't pick on you, I would pick on you. Because I pick on everyone else. But I get there and I say, you know what? Someone needs to be in Michael's camp because everyone picks on him. So you got me, brother.
Why do you think I love you so much?
Yeah, I love you, man. You're the best. Everyone else, you're fair game. I'm going to pick on you. Sorry, but not Michael.
Well, Michael does a pretty good job at defending himself.
Well, not only that, he has weapons.
He's got swords.
He does have swords.
I do.
Oh, yeah. But sometimes they pick on him in love. So it's only fun abuse sometimes.
Well, yes, yes, that's true. And sometimes it's fun for me to get picked on, but I think you have a good spider sense for it. I think when, and I think that's why you and I work together so well.
Indeed. And this has been fantastic. I mean, I can't believe how many wonderful people showed up tonight. We appreciate seeing all of you here. Well, tonight for some, morning for others, I don't know. But I think we're towards are we starting? I want to get some plugs in to let everybody know what's going on with ICONICON.
I want to plug both of you guys real quick because for everybody listening, first of all, Clobberin Times. Mike is a veteran podcaster. You can tell from this discussion. He's also a veteran of comic book, superheroes, sci-fi, and geek culture. And I'm so glad he's on YouTube. And he just did a collaboration with me on Pride of the X-Men. And so if you guys haven't subscribed to him and you love this kind of subject matter, you could really do yourself a favor and subscribe to his channel. And then Infinity Equation, from where Alex hails, is the best podcast for discussing, or live stream, for discussing modern toys and toy collecting every Friday night. I watch it religiously so I don't have to actually join any toy groups anymore. And my toy group is now Infinity Equation, just being in the chat in the comments, and my comic book stuff is all with Mike here at Clobberin Times. So
I
also
appreciate you, buddy.
also movie talk and geek talk and sci-fi talk.
We do other stuff. Track. And
you do a
like
lot
that,
of
but,
you do a lot of other stuff. A lot of other stuff.
Well, so you've always been my go-to guy on toys and Star Wars and and these things. I use them all the time, Alex. If I need to know something, if someone asks me a question, like if it's to do with a lot of stuff, because Mike knows this knowledge is extraordinary. I can go ask him about. I'll bug him in a private message, and he'll tell me. And then I'll go and act like I know it. Yeah, this is. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do that. I say no. I checked with my buddy Michael, and he told me.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, if anyone out there, I'm not in this world, but for anyone out there in the chat right now who is a pro wrestling fan, you need to be watching Alex's segments on Infinity Equation.
Yeah.
The man is an encyclopedia for every single wrestler, competition, championship, whatever they call them, action figure. I've never seen anything like it. Okay. Yeah. And I've seen some wrestling figure collectors, but there's only one wrestling figure collector that was worthy enough to be on an Infinity Equation.
Thanks,
right?
Michael. And I can't let you get away without showering you with compliments too. I think I don't know, maybe you don't remember mushy letter that I wrote to you on Facebook years ago, just describing how you and the rest of the Retro Blasting crew were my gateway into this YouTube world of toy reviews and pop culture and all that stuff. And to this day, you guys are my #1 fave show on the YouTubes, and your content just keeps getting better and better. So thank you guys. Yeah.
I'm just glad to hear that it. See, I want everyone to hear that he wrote me and he didn't have a bad experience, and he doesn't hate me.
Very nice. Quick response.
Dude, nobody that knows you hates you anyway. They just don't know you, that because we both know, Mike, you and I've talked about this all the time. The surest way to make an enemy is to have an opinion.
Right. That's true. That's true.
And there was a time when we lived in more serious times that would have to be like a serious, like a social opinion or a quote unquote political opinion. Hell, it's just an opinion about a TV show or a comic book or a movie, and you're a monster to some. Yep. Just some, not all of us. Not anyone who's well adjusted, but to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right.
And guys, try not to take it so seriously,
Yep.
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's just like when Michael criticizes something, first of all, I love critical thought. I think it's another reason why we get along so well. But when you criticize something, I've never once heard him attack anyone who likes it. But you still got to be brutal. If you're be brutally honest about what you're reviewing and talking about.
Yeah.
Give your opinion. It's never. Yeah. Some people will take it personally because they happen to like the thing that you might be that is in your crosshairs. But that's a shame. I don't know what. And it's more and more these days. No one knows that better than you, Michael. And it's kind of a shame.
Yeah. You're right. But that's why I think that's why I think all of this has gone so well today and will for the next 3 or 4 days is like we found so many people in the community that are like reasonable. They have healthy conversations and they're knowledgeable. And this is just proof positive of that. I really, really appreciate both of you guys doing this event with us and putting together these learned conversations that everybody can, experience and enjoy and take something away with them from. So,
absolutely. But let's face it, none of us are anywhere near as awesome as Melinda.
That's true.
You, Melinda. Let's embarrass Melinda. Let's embarrass Melinda.
That's absolutely true. For everybody who wants to know what the next Iconicon thing is, Lio Convoy Reviews has a video that's premiering now. It's called The True History of the Thundercats. Over at Lio Convoy Reviews. So Iconicon rolls on. So
yes, and here again in the chat, I am putting a link to the entire playlist schedule of all either videos that have already been done, or panels that are already gone on, or streams, or to ones to come. And this is running all the way through Sunday.
Right.
And you got to take a look at that list. You will not believe all the amazing. The very panels that they're having and videos that they're having. It's just astonishing, folks. This is a monumental effort put together by everyone, headed by Melinda. You're going to need a whole week of sleep, Melinda, when you get this.
Yeah,
this
we will. We will.
Going to need some rest.
Yeah. I'm hopped up on RC Cola and, just candy right now. Just like.
Are you able to get RC pretty easily?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
over there.
Man,
Up
I
there.
thought RC Cola went out in like the 90s or something. I can't find it anywhere.
Well, Michael lives in the 90s.
It's my elixir of the gods. So.
Oh man, yeah. Thank you all so much for being here today. We appreciate you, and I know we ran over time, didn't we, Michael? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
So,
it's okay.
We will leave without any kind of credits or anything like that. I just want to say, everyone, you've been amazing. And Alex, it is good to meet you. Michael, it's always great to hang out with everyone. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. And please watch all the Iconicon covers because it's just amazing.
Just getting started.
Just getting started. There you go.